This conference will now be recorded.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back to this edition of the House and Home Virtual Learning Series from CSL Management. For those of you I haven't had an opportunity to meet, my name is Scott Fussell, and I'm the host of the series. I'm also the Director of Education for CSL Management. I had an absolutely life-changing fraternity experience at Beta Theta Pi at Middle Tennessee State, and I think that's why I continue to do what I do, and I think that's why most of you continue to do what you do, because fraternity and sorority has given us so much that we feel obligated to hopefully pass along that same experience to students who are coming up behind us. So grateful that you decided to spend some time with us today. By showing up, it just reveals to us that you care deeply about this community, you care deeply about these facilities, you care deeply about the students who call them home. And for that, and for all you've done this summer, and for all that you're doing leading into the fall and going throughout the fall, no, we are extraordinarily grateful. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Today is the last session of our first series, Predictably Unpredictable. And we're wrapping up today with our Readiness Town Hall. This is sort of our last ditch effort to field as many questions as we possibly can, so you can hopefully feel a little bit more prepared than you were coming into the session as you get ready for students to be knocking on your doors and moving back in. We have covered a ton these last few months, and we've tried to bring content to you that was relevant and hopes you feel like you're ready, and trust that we've been able to do that. And again, today's kind of our last second shot. We know that the clock is ticking. There are students at home right now who are packing their bags and they're getting ready to show up on your front porch. So today's really about bringing it all together, bringing all the pieces to this puzzle together so we feel really good about where we are sitting in terms of being prepared to receive those students back into our chapter home. So to help us do that, we've put together a really amazing all-star team today, and I'd love to introduce them to you. So first off, we're really thrilled to introduce to you Libby Anderson. She's the Chief Executive Officer at Zeta Beta Tau Fraternity, a dear friend, and has been in the industry for a minute. So so grateful that Libby has made some time to spend with us this morning. Welcome, Libby. Thanks for being with us.
Scott, thanks for inviting me and providing these outstanding opportunities for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Next up on our panel, we've got Jeff Rundle, who's the Executive Director at Beta Theta Pi, and he's also the General Counsel for the organization. He's been a good friend for about 20 years or so, and so grateful for him cutting out some time in his day, knowing what a busy time of the year we're in. So Jeff, welcome, and thanks for making some time with us.
Thanks so much, Scott, and thanks so much for everybody for joining. Glad to be joining you from the booming metropolis of Oxford, Ohio.
Absolutely. So we miss Oxford this time of year. So next up on our panel, we've got Adam Guy, who's the owner and Chief Executive Officer of Upper Crust Food Service. Adam and his team have just done an absolutely amazing job this summer, helping prepare our kitchens and dining rooms for what's going to look a lot different this fall in terms of how we serve and seat our residents. So Adam, thanks so much for making some time to be with us today and all you've done this summer. Welcome.
Hey, thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate everybody joining us, and I'm looking forward to learning from the rest of the panel today.
Awesome. So next to last on our panel, we've got Cassie Gerhardt. She is wearing multiple hats for us today. So Cassie is the president of Alpha Chi Omega's National House Corporation, and she's also the associate VPSA at University of North Dakota. So she's got a couple of different perspectives she's going to bring to us today, and really grateful that she found time in her schedule to be with us. So Cassie, welcome, and thanks for being with us today.
Good morning, Scott and everybody, and greetings from the great state of North Dakota.
Home of chippers and the best pretzels ever. So thanks, Cassie. Appreciate you being with us. And finally, we got a member of the home team, Woody Ratterman, who's my right arm at CSL Management. He's our managing partner here, a chapter brother of mine at Beta at Middle Tennessee State. He's been on what we're referring to as the hotspot tour. We've sent him to every COVID hotspot in the country the last few weeks, and we appreciate him coming back off the road and spending some time with us today. Woody, thanks and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Scott.
So let's talk about today. It's really about you. It's about your questions, and it's about our readiness as a community. Let's talk about how you can engage in the conversation today. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have some preloaded questions that were submitted earlier in the week. So we're going to go through those questions, but would love for you to make sure you leave here with your questions answered. And so to do that, just we point you to the control panel and your GoToMeeting control panel, and go to that conversation cloud. If you click on that, you will see that'll immediately take you into the chat, and would love for you to submit your questions there. And if you have a specific panelist you would like for them to answer, your question, please make sure that you note their name in that chat. So that's how we're going to run the conversation today. Again, if you have questions along the way, please. This is the best shot we've got it as we go into the fall to make sure we get those last second questions answered. So please be generous with those questions, keep them coming, and we'll answer as many as we can in the next 75 to 90 minutes. So with that being said, let's get after it. Cassie, I'm going to go to you first. I mentioned that you're wearing a couple of different hats for us today. So I would love for you starting out to put your campus professional hat on. This is a little bit of a softball, but it has to be asked. Amongst campus professionals, those are your peers at North Dakota, what are the most common concerns you're hearing expressed when it comes to fraternity and sorority? And especially given all that we've been through with COVID-19 as we head into the fall, what are the most common concerns you're hearing expressed on campuses?
Thanks, Scott. And I think that is probably the easiest question, and it's probably the question that we all could easily answer. We're worried about our members. We're worried about the experiences they'll have this fall, and we're worried about our chapter facilities becoming epicenters or hotbeds of COVID sharing amongst our members. When you get a COVID test, in my community at least, one of the questions you answer is if you live in congregate housing. Well, there's no denser congregate housing that exists near a college campus than our fraternities and sororities. And so that is the top concern. And related to that, for my campus, where the fraternity and sorority facilities are located in off-campus property, we're concerned about the events that are going to happen this fall. While we can set rules and control things on campus property, as soon as you cross the street and are on private property owned by house corporation boards, the rules are very, very different. And so significant concerns about what will happen there. As students return to campuses and are looking for things to do, there's things that the university will not be able to provide. Again, those same rules may not apply to the chapter facility that is housed across the street, and that is causing great concern amongst my immediate colleagues.
Yeah, it's how do we, we'll talk about this a little bit later. How do we prevent ourselves from becoming the headline this fall? So when that local news station shows up on the first day of campus, when students are moving in, who are so eager to see each other again because they've not seen each other for 5 months, right? So along those lines, thinking about the campus again, what can our organizations do to be supportive partners of our host institutions? If we've got volunteers or maybe house directors or staff members that are looking for guidance, and what's the best way they can reach out to the university or the local community and ask for support and help as we work toward that goal of being a really good partner to our host institution? What are recommendations you have there?
Sure. I will tell you all, every day since Wednesday, March the 11th, I have spent from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in a pandemic planning meeting. Every day, Monday through Friday since March 11th. And I would tell you, we're still changing ours for the campus. So I say, I know how confused I am in getting ready for the fall semester on one campus. My sympathies and condolences to my headquarters counterparts who are trying to navigate this for literally hundreds of communities, because I know we're still struggling to even figure out what that looks like. I would say try to be partners. Try to find out, contact your appropriate staff counterparts, email a VPSA, find out what's going on. And to the extent that you can support your local alumni and students in following the guidelines set by the local community, that's the kind of support we'd ask for. And I recognize that these plans vary from one campus to another. The plan at the University of North Dakota varies from what my counterparts are doing at North Dakota State University, 70 miles away. It is very campus specific, but I'd look for people to be good partners as we head into the fall semester. And it goes back to where we started. Again, we want students to have a consistent experience from what's happening on the campus versus what's happening at a fraternity or property or a sorority property. And so just being good partners and following those guidelines set at the local level is the kind of support we're looking for.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, and to your point a little bit earlier, you talked about how those plans change frequently. It's something we've talked about all summers. We have to be nimble because we're learning something new every week or every day even that indicates that we've got to course correct a little bit. So working with your university and working with the local officials to make sure that we're up on what the local guidelines are is going to be critical. So thank you for that, Cassie. Moving on to Libby for a second, kind of along those same lines and some of the behavioral expectations we've been concerned about. We know this fall is going to look different, significantly different than any other we've experienced. So, what are you expecting from the men who call our chapter houses home, and how exactly are we communicating what those expectations are and how we feel like they need to be self-governing? What can you offer our audience in those regards?
One of the most important things to remember is that the chapter house is their home, and we need to be able to try to make this as comfortable as possible, because it's very daunting to be coming back to a place where you've missed your friends, you've missed your brothers, you've missed your sisters for so long, and you want to be able to spend time with them, but you also want to keep your home safe. And so what you start from the beginning and you talk about the expectations. This is completely new. So just like with anything, when you introduce something new, it's important to have an orientation or what it looks like to come back, and have that communication with not only the residents of the chapter facility, but all the brothers and sisters of the organizations and their parents, because there's a lot of people that come into play to help support our members in their new version of their living environments. Part of that is also, we want to keep our homes safe and making sure that we are keeping each other safe, and it's everyone's responsibility. When we talk about self-governance, many times that self-governance falls to the executive board of the chapter, but this is an all play, people. Like, everybody in the chapter is in charge of self-governance and looking out for our brothers and looking out for our sisters. And so as we have the new the new normal in our facilities, the new rules, the new expectations, have a conversation, talk about what we're doing, why we're having it, why we are having temperature checks, how we're going to manage guests in our facilities, because our people are social people. That's why they joined organizations and they want to be together, and that's why it's so important for them to get back to campus. But we have to bring them into the conversation so they're not just being dictated what to do. Bring them in, get the buy-in. We are all responsible for the safety of each other, and explain why we have a mask rule, why we have our 6-foot social distancing, how we're going to adapt our activities, whether that's recruitment, socials, dinner, lunch, how we study. Bring them into that conversation, and also ask for, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about this? And how can you help us make it better? Have them be a part of the solution as well.
Oh, I think that's critical. We've been talking, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had a session on the socially distanced chapter house. And that's been one of the big questions we've gotten all summer is, okay, how did you expect us to enforce, which I don't care for that word, to make sure that students are compliant? Another word I'm not crazy about. How do we help them own it, I think is the better way. And I think what you just said, including students in the process, in the creation of the policies and the procedures, and helping them own their own environment and own their care for each other, I think is going to be critical. So I think that's extraordinary guidance. And so what, and it sort of leads into my next question. So how do we help house directors and house corporations continue to support that process and to reiterate those expectations? Is there anything we can do there to constantly reinforce that message?
So a couple different things. It starts with the environment we create before they get back to campus. And so that is letting them know what the expectations are going to be in advance, potentially having a webinar or a town hall so that it's not a surprise when they walk in the door. Managing your move-in process and making sure that everybody understands how we're going to manage that process, what the limitations are going to be, as well as using your opportunity for signage, and have fun with it. Like, you can put signage up to, we always got to remind people about, We shouldn't have to remind people to wash their hands, but we do. So have some fun with that signage. I know that our insurance partners at James R. Faber and Holmes Murphy have created some great resources for us, but also there's some ways to bring some humor into it and be able to have some talking points that are really on par with where our college students are at. So, you know, having those hand sanitation stations, having the signs, managing how we're going to do our meals, but also being able to make meals fun. Like, so we have to be socially distanced apart. You know, one of the things is the new rule is going to be wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, and wave to your brothers. We don't high five anymore. We don't knuckle bump anymore. Like, you know, and it's starting new traditions and actually trying to manage and make it become normal and have fun, because again, they are social beings. Managing how, like, rather than talk about all the things we can't do when it comes to our daily activities, let's talk about how we can enhance it. You know, when it comes to recruitment events or social events or meals, you know, we can't gather in the large numbers that we've been able to do before. Maybe this is a great opportunity for us to gather by like interest. And we can do some intentional programming, intentional organization, intentional planning around different types of similarities and also differences to be able to learn from each other. But it starts from the top down. Let's be positive role models about it. Let's, you know, some of our house corporations are providing branded masks for our members. So we know that there is a mask that they have. And so if they say they don't have a mask, we're like, nope, we have one for you. Some people are going to be doing some different partnerships with local medical facilities. I know one of our chapter house corporations has contracted with a local CVS to have them come in and test on a calendar, like, you know, on a regular basis, test our brothers so that they don't have to wait in line at the campus health services to do so. So there's some ways that you can make things easier that are at a fairly low cost compared to the lives that you're saving. And also talk about, again, it's our civic duty, it's our social responsibility to be leaders in this, because fraternities and sororities are most looked at, and we need to be the leaders on campus that we can do this and we can do it well.
Love all of that. There were three things that you mentioned amongst many that I want to go back to. I love the fact that you encourage everybody to set the good example. You know, I think every one of us who has a child in school right now has been on a Zoom call with the local school board, and everybody's got an opinion about whether we should go back or whether we should be virtual, should be a combination of the two. But the one thing that we all agree on is we should be setting a really good example for our students. And so, you know, if we are constantly bitching and moaning and griping about what's going on in the world, then you can bet our students are going to do the same. But if we can have an optimistic, hopeful attitude about all this, I think that changes the game. So I love the example. And we talk about, you know, we got to model the right actions and the right reactions to all of this. So I think that modeling the way is such a huge point. And as we prepare for this fall, the other thing you hit on was you talked about the move-in process and communicating that up front. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to see our move-in makeover webinar from a few weeks ago, we hit on a lot of the stuff that Libby just talked about, and having a pre, mid, and post move-in process communication plan, and having your students engaged in all that. So a lot of really wonderful ideas in that session that kind of reiterate what Libby just hit on. And then the last thing that she mentioned was, you know, having fun with it. That's one of the reasons I think I don't like. I have an adverse reaction to the word compliance, because there's a that doesn't sound like a fun thing, right? When you're complying with something. But you know, we're seeing signage all over the place. Where, you know, an example last week was, you know, clearly written by somebody from Alabama or Auburn, and it was like, okay, 6 feet. That's exactly the amount of space you want between you and an LSU fan. You know, so there are things you can do to make it fun and make it a little bit more engaging. So I love all that. So thank you, Libby, for those insights. It's really, really helpful. So let's move to our good friend Jeff Rundle. Jeff, talk to us about Beta Theta Pi, and what are your staff members, your volunteers, what are those, what are you communicating to your collegiate members in regards to how they're expected to conduct themselves on campus this fall, knowing the spotlight and the microscope that's going to be on us? But more importantly, how are you, and Libby hit on this a little bit, how are they expected, or how are you communicating what the expectation is in terms of how they care for those around them? How do they care for professors? How do they care for house directors, volunteers, or folks like me who are moving into a demographic that is a little bit more at risk than the 18 to 22-year-olds? What are you communicating to your members?
God, I think first, we certainly start with knowledge. We have 140 chapters across Beta's broad domain, and there are literally 140 different flavors of state, local, and campus-based guidance that are out there. And so this is a time we have to lean on our house corporation folks locally. We have to lean on our local advisors to help our chapter leaders know and understand, and then spread that knowledge through our brotherhood. So I would say that the knowledge part is first. I would say second, and this is, I think, aligned with what Libby shared. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for us to exemplify our values, for us to be about the very best things of a fraternity or sorority experience. For Beta, that means mutual aid and assistance. That's showing up for our brothers, our communities. That's wearing a mask. That is washing your hands. And so I think framing things through our values and our obligations, both to our brothers as well as those that we interact with on campus, our professors, faculty, staff. I think the last thing and is that we always want to lead strong with the first two, but they need to understand that they need to hold each other accountable, that accountability for this is going to really reside in the local communities, in the local brotherhood, that this is a new set of expectations, but we need to empower our officers, our volunteers locally to help bring that message of accountability, hopefully informally, in the one-off, and the brotherly challenge of hey, are you going to walk out of the house without your mask? Are you going to? But that's the space that we also need to make sure we're present in, be that at the individual level or at the chapter level.
Yeah, I love that, the opportunity comment. Knowing one of our values is aid or mutual assistance, that doesn't just apply for how you and I interact with each other. That applies to how we as members interact and care for those around us that aren't necessarily members. So I love that, the idea of taking it back to our ritual and reiterating, hey, this is an opportunity for us to actually live out what we say we're about. So I love that perspective, and I appreciate the approach that you're taking there, Jeff. Thanks for sharing that. Let's go back to that social distancing theme for just a minute. Especially in the midst of some of the chatter we're seeing with this Abolish Greek Life. I won't call it a movement, but more chatter and noise than anything. But what can our organizations do to create a more inclusive, connected environment for students to join and to experience, and how do we communicate that message, knowing that the chapter house might not necessarily be as integral to that process as it traditionally is? Talk to us about inclusivity and connectedness in an environment where we are being encouraged to separate.
Scott, you may be a little bit more optimistic about the Abolish Greek Life movement than I've come off some recent calls with our own chapters and with some of our advisors, and I will say the message they're sending me is the pressure is intense. It is withering, and it can be incredibly hurtful and incredibly unfair at times for our brothers and sisters to have to face this type of pressure and these allegations. And so the first thing that I would say, and this is probably a little bit more bent toward this, is that we've got to support our brothers and sisters right now. The social distancing aspects, the fact that they may or may not reside with their brothers or sisters, the fact that they may or may not have had physical interaction with or the regular support of meetings, advisor, mentoring, it sets us up to be naturally a little weaker, and it sets it up for people to have some really hard evaluation about whether this is worth it or not. And so I think we've got to support our members to make sure that there are Greek communities and that they are there with their brothers to do the work that needs to be done. I would say second, we have to do the work. We've got to do it together. And I actually think that some of the social distancing is, again, an opportunity for us to take the focus off of some things. Large houses, a specific high-end meal plan, an elite social experience. Some of those things aren't going to be able to be at the disposal of our members this year. And so this is an opportunity to really get to the heart of who we would want our brotherhood to include, how we would want to bring them in. It's an opportunity to get to know people and really understand their motivations for wanting to be a part of your community. And I think we've got to help reframe the narrative when it comes to looking at potential new members, when it comes to reaching out to groups that maybe we haven't before, to learning. I think social distancing gives us that opportunity to take a pause and maybe step away from the traditional trappings that have reinforced some of the structures that do breed a lack of inclusivity.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit on a couple of things there that I need to react to. It's you know, there have been a lot of questions over the last few years about is fraternity still even relevant? And I guess my response to that is I think it's beyond that. I think it's necessary. I think especially when we think about how disconnected we've been encouraged to be this summer, the connectedness and the community that we provide, I think is necessary. So when people say, are we relevant? I guess my response to that is no, we're absolutely necessary, because I don't know that students need fraternity more, that students have needed fraternity more than they do right now. In some of my conversations with a career coach and a life coach, Lindsay Picardo, who we'll have in a couple of weeks, she's talking about, one of the things we'll be talking about is, okay, what can you expect this summer, this fall, when your students arrive back on campus? And she shared that, you know, with when you think about the way students left campus in the spring, how abrupt that was, you think about all the intense pressure that you just mentioned in terms of Abolish Greek Life, and you think about all the social, civil, and political unrest we've all experienced this summer, students are actually going to be returning to campus tired and burnt out in many cases. And so that's going to be a different that's going to show up in ways that we've not seen before. So it's going to be really important for us as volunteers, as staff members, as house directors and campus professionals to be aware of what they've been going through, because to your point, we've got to support them in ways that maybe we haven't even considered before. So I appreciate your sensitivity to all that. And I think it's a great reminder of this is a great opportunity to be a bridge builder and to go and pick those students up, because it sounds like they are going to need a lot of it this fall. So thanks for sharing all that, because I think it's we have a big opportunity here in many ways, regardless of what our role is, either as a student leader or as a volunteer or staff member. So thank you, Jeff. I need to go back to Cassie really quickly. Cassie, if you wouldn't mind, I need you to put your organizational leader hat back on for a second and talk about the 2 or 3 top areas that Alpha Chi Omega has focused on to ensure facilities are safe this fall. What are the 2 or 3 main focus areas that ACIO has focused on?
To list only 2 or 3 is probably the challenge with this one, Scott,
Sure.
because there's so many things. And so I also just want to say, I recognize I serve as a board member when it comes to this, and the kudos needs to go to all of our headquarters staff members who've been working in this stuff night and day. And so I will do a special shout out to Amy Jo Gable and her team at Alpha Chi Omega for the work that they've done with our chapters since March and before. But I think it started with, and it goes off of something that Libby said, it's working with our students and understanding their chapter experiences and engaging them in the process. And so our housing staff team at headquarters for Alpha Chi has worked directly with our chapter experiences team, and so that we are engaged in and consulting specifically with our chapters to understand their experiences. We've talked about occupancy. How do we make facilities less dense? How do we get ready for cleaning and food service needs for the fall? Because those will look very, very different. It's come to a lot of budget conversations. What do we need to be able to operate a facility safely and soundly for our members this fall? What does that look like? It has been lots of planning and communication. So it's yeoman's work, but I think it's all the same things that your campus-based housing teams are working on. It's how do we move people into again, these congregate living quarters to be safely. So it's the cleaning, it's the food, it's the budgets, it's all of those things. And again, the circumstances around those look very different now than they did maybe in May when we first started having these conversations. You know, we expected things to ease up by the time the fall semester was starting, and now we see states where COVID is on the rise. My own state that really was pretty good for quite some time as of this morning is now the darker orange or red on the CDC's website. So things aren't good in North Dakota. They're actually the worst they've been through the whole process. So again, all of this is, we've raised those 2 or 3 things, but they've changed every day of this process.
Yeah. And that goes back to where our conversation began, is the need to be nimble, because things are changing almost hourly, it seems like. So kind of along those lines, and needing to be nimble and knowing some of the trends that we're seeing, you know, and you're super connected throughout the community, but could you speak to maybe Alpha Chi Omega or maybe the greater community? What are you hearing in terms of plans to close houses if campuses close? And, you know, are you hearing that a lot of organizations, you know, will they or will they not be opening houses on campuses where classroom instructions are being online or are happening online? So, you know, what are you hearing? Are you seeing any trends internally or within the greater community in terms of, you know, what are you seeing develop in that regard?
And Scott, I don't mean to pivot. I think this is one of those where it really depends on the circumstances. So,
Yep.
And we understand COVID differently now than we did in March. And so a response now to a campus's decision to go remote is very different than it would have been in March. Whether we stay open or we close, it's got to make sense for that specific chapter and that specific facility. And so I think it really depends. For some of our students, they may not have another place to go if we closed our facility. University of North Dakota, we never closed our residence halls. We've never closed them throughout this entire thing because we've got students, international students, who can't return home. Our international students are Canada. They can't necessarily get easily back over the border. Some of that is starting to change. So again, we're really watching it, but it really will depend what are the circumstances for that specific chapter and facility. Does it make sense for them to stay open if you go remote? Do more of their members live very close to the chapter house and would prefer to then live at home? Does that make sense? Are they geographically distant from family and this makes more sense? So again, I think it all depends on the specific circumstances. At this point, we're not planning to close houses if campuses close, but we'll have those conversations with our chapter leaders.
Yeah, and again, it's a great point. Like you know, when we're making decisions in terms of how we service a local facility, it's all based on what's happening locally. It's not, you know, what's happening in North Dakota is infinitely different than what may be happening in Fishers. So it's when we say we've got to constantly be aware of what's happening in our neighborhood. I think that's you know, we've heard that theme pop up multiple times already in our 40-minute discussion today. So so we would love for there to be a broad brush with which we could paint an answer to that question, but it really comes back to what's happening locally. And so continue, whether you're a house director or a local volunteer, continue to be mindful of what's happening on the ground in your campus and in your community, and react based on those guidelines as opposed to what you might be seeing on a national level even. So let's move over to our friend Adam really quickly. So Adam, one of the things that we have loved to see this summer, and it hasn't been a surprise, but your upper crust and so many other folks that your peers in the kitchen management services field have just done an extraordinary job of helping prepare for this fall. And we've talked a lot about that, you know, what's going to be changing or enhanced in the kitchen and in the dining room. But talk to us about kind of last minute recommendations, knowing how much things have changed recently, especially when it comes to that 18 to 24-year-old age demographic. You know, have you seen any dramatic shifts recently that are going to change the approach this fall? Or, you know, what are the last minute decisions and discussions we need to be having as we prepare for students to move back in? Your thoughts?
Sure. No, I think it's a great question, and you're right. The kitchen management industry, I think that all of our peers have really stepped up to put some great information out. So the information has been flowing rapidly to all of our different members and webinars and a lot of different platforms. And I think really what's important right now is that we're down kind of getting closer to school starting. And so now it's a matter of not necessarily having all of this information that's out there, but now it's time to take the information and find out what is going to specifically work for your chapter on your campus. And so I think that what's interesting is, like, we have come up with 4 different serving options that would be possibilities for next school year. All of these would be great scenarios, but it really depends on where you live, what your university is going to allow, what your local health department is going to allow, and also what your corporation board or national office wants to do. So I think at this point, it's about taking all the great information that's out there and narrowing it down to what's going to work specifically for your chapter. And obviously, most importantly, it is making sure that you are compliant with the local regulations, because as Jeff mentioned earlier, you know, with his 140 different beta theta pies and 140 different options, the same is going to be true on food service. There really isn't one health department that's going to look at this exactly like another. And then we also have some groups where the health department doesn't come into the fraternity or sorority house. So in that case, it's really up to your food service company or for you and your staff to make sure that you're keeping your members and your staff safe.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's, again, there's the local theme again. So, well, let's move from soup to sanitizer, as cheesy as that sounds. Also cheesy. I know Upper Crust has been providing supplies for some time now, and so just curious, what suggestions do you have for folks who are looking to acquire PPE or hand sanitizer? Other supplies of equipment in these closing weeks. Some folks could be behind the 8 ball. We know that, the lead time on things like hand sanitizer are pretty significant right now. So what guidance do you have for folks like that or looking to make those acquisitions these last few weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. When we started looking and we were in our war room going, okay, what are we going to do here in terms of response to this COVID situation? And obviously everyone has been affected, and we started kind of turning from, feeling sorry for yourself about the situation to, okay, what do we do in Greek life? Well, we step up and we figure out how can we help, right? How can we help each other? And so one way that we thought we could help the community as a whole was through the supply chains that we have set up. That we had access to some products that maybe would be difficult for an individual corporation board to get their hands on just searching online, right, or through their resources. So our procurement manager, Mason Upton, has done a really great job this summer of working with our vendors. And what we've learned about this process is that what's available today may not be available tomorrow. And the price that's available today may increase tomorrow. And so what's really important right now is that we're stocking up on these essential items. If you have not ordered these items yet, I really recommend that you get on that. And I also would just ask for flexibility, because what we have found from a vendor standpoint is, we pre-ordered a whole bunch of hand sanitizer stands, touchless hand dispenser units. And then we found out that, these items got oversold and we had to pivot to another dispenser, right? And so those types of things are going to be happening. And so I think that we just all kind of are going to have to work together. But if you need information on any of the products that we can obtain for you, I will put in the chat a link to our COVID resources, which has a list of all the products that we currently have available. And then you can just work directly with Mason at our office and he can ship that to you. And we've made this available for anyone in the industry, even if you're not an Upper Crust food service customer.
Perfect. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you for that. That's huge. So yeah, because I know a lot of folks are kind of behind the 8 ball right now. So having another resource to go and acquire those products here in crunch time is critical. So thanks, Adam.
No problem.
Woody. Let's turn to the home team really quickly and get more into more of an operational type question. So kind of staying in that cleaning neighborhood for a moment. Had a question from a house director earlier this week asking about foggers and sprayers, that type of thing, and wanted to know, when is the timing right for that type of application, and what do you suggest we do in terms of cleaning meeting rooms and after chapter meetings and kind of larger gatherings? What recommendations do you have in terms of those applications and cleaning gathering spaces once we've had an event?
Sure. So on the foggers and sprayers, main recommendation is there are several options out there. So do your homework, and one's not particularly better than the other in terms of overall functionality. They're different. So the foggers themselves and how they adhere to the surface versus an electrostatic sprayer and how they adhere to the surface are different. So, and it's not hard to get educated on them, and the cost between the two can vary. And you need to understand if how the product is sold that actually goes with the machines and the accessibility of that product as well. We have seen that many groups out there who have decided to purchase one for their facility have had some luck for that. And I think we have resources on our page that would show you where to go and find some of those sprayers that are available and out in the market. What we have heard time and time again, that still from a cleaning standpoint, there's nothing better than disinfecting just with a disinfected spray and wiping it with a cloth. That is still your biggest and best way in terms of cleaning. We did learn, I did not even know this too, and been cleaning our house for 30 years, is that when you spray the disinfectant, it is important that you let it sit for a period of time, somewhere between 8 to 10 minutes before you just go back and wipe it off. So there are some of those things that are out there that, again, all this information is available for you to look. I would recommend after meetings, certainly engage the chapter, have disinfectant available, have wipes available, towels available, that the members themselves, as they're walking out, have the ability to wipe down stations or their chairs or wherever they were as they leave. And that should be a common practice anywhere in the house where you have study, dining, things of that nature. Give the members an opportunity to participate in the process. We know financially we're already having to spend more on cleaning, especially on the men's side. We may never even had outside professional cleaning coming into the facility, and we're already financially strained. So whatever you can do to engage the members. I was just reading through the safety plan for our kids' schools going into the fall, and they plan to have every student before they leave class, they're shutting class down 5 minutes early so they can all wipe their stations down as they leave for the next student. So I think it's just really common sense and having that ability. But certainly if you have an outbreak, make sure that your cleaning company or if you hire your cleaners, that they understand how to come in and properly disinfect if you do have a positive case in your house. And to me, that's probably going to be the opportunity where it makes the most sense to have the sprayer to come in as a supplement to the wiping down and disinfecting itself. Some of us may not have the financial wherewithal to buy that piece of equipment and to properly supply it and use it every week and the frequency of things of that nature. So know that what has been consistent throughout this process is that if you have a disinfectant spray, you spray it, you let it sit for a minute and come back and wipe, that is still as effective as anything out there in the market.
Awesome. I do kind of staying on the cleaning front. I'm jumping over to the chat right now and fielding some of the questions there. And we talked about this a little earlier this week, Woody. There's a question here about the value or the application about UV lighting. Mm-hmm. And could you speak to that for a second, and we'll make sure Leanne gets her question answered? Sure.
So on that front, the air quality in the building has certainly been a hot topic the last 60 days as we've learned more and more. To Cassie's point earlier, we're learning every day about the virus and how we need to react to it and what options are out there. And what we have learned is that still the number one thought process in terms of how the virus spreads the easiest is through the air, and the droplets are appearing to linger in the air more frequently than originally thought. So in that, air quality is important. And there have certainly been a lot of things that have come out regarding UV lights and the possibilities of how effective they could be, the quality of your air filters, a myriad of different things. What we would encourage you to do first and foremost is whoever is servicing or maintaining your mechanical systems, this conversation needs to be directed to them. They will know your system the best. They will know whether your system can effectively take on a UV light or not, because not all systems can. It has been shown that sunlight, that the virus does not do well in sunlight. So the theory is the UV light should be as effective. I don't know, and I've not seen anything myself personally that I've read through that is said that it is an absolute. But if your system can take a UV light, it does a myriad of different things for your air quality. So it may not be a bad thing to invest in if your system can take it and it's within your budget. As it relates to the filters, keep in mind a thicker filter may not necessarily be something that you want to introduce to your system, because it could impact the overall performance negatively of your system. So again, have that conversation before you say, well, we've been using a MERV 8 or a MERV 10, which is the scale they use in terms of the quality of the filter, and we're going to go up to a MERV 13. The higher the number, the thicker and the more effective from a filtering standpoint. Well, that could drag on the quality of the system. So you need to talk to your mechanical partner and talking through what your system has. The key is we just need to make sure the system's working properly, we have good airflow, and that we're doing everything we can to maintain it properly. To me, is the biggest piece of that.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay with you, Woody, for a second, because a question we've been getting a lot recently has been, okay, what happens when we have a diagnosis? How do we quarantine a student? And so I want you to speak more broadly, excuse me, than what the question's actually asking, but talk through what's ideal, talk through what is likely, and just speak to that idea of what happens when a student's diagnosed. What are our options in terms of quarantining?
Yeah, and so just I've been watching those questions too, Scott, from earlier. So I saw the one about in New York and different areas, and this is again going back to the emphasis that we all need to be staying on top of these things, being educated and watching, because it is a moving needle. And if you've heard me on a few panelists in the last couple of weeks, I've noted going into July, we were all feeling pretty good about things, and certainly the uptick since the last 3 weeks of July has had a tremendous impact on what our universities are doing and what our states are doing. So this question is really interesting as we now navigate with states like New York, and I think New Jersey as well, that anybody visiting from a key 22 states, I think is the number right now, and it keeps changing. If they're coming to their states, they're going to be required to quarantine for 14 days. We've seen, we've heard that Cornell actually appealed to Cuomo's office asking for them to be able to be excluded from this requirement, and they got shot down within 48 hours. So on top of everything else that we're navigating, now we're having to think about students that are coming to our facilities that may be coming from these different states, and they're going to have to quarantine for 14 days. And make no mistake, some of them are taking it very serious. We heard where one instance, someone landed in New York, they got the form, they filled it out before they left the airport, and within 2 hours of reaching their Airbnb, police were there verifying that they were there. So I'm hoping that rational minds, at least as it relates to our students, or there's some opportunities there going into the next couple of weeks, will help make this easier for us, but this is real. So the one question that, so quarantine, there's not a silver bullet. Ideally, if they can quarantine or isolate outside of the facility, that would be great, but now we're finding we have to get them in the facility and let them sit there for 14 days, or at least in town for 14 days, and we got to think through how we're going to make that work. Some of our residents and their roommates may not have a concern about it, but we also know in the last 2 weeks, as is typically, our parents are now becoming more concerned. And I can't imagine the calls that Libby and Jeff and the rest of their counterparts and the teams at AKO and everywhere else are taking right now from parents in relation to they're hearing about the quarantining, and if their roommates coming from one of these states, what accommodations are we going to be doing for them? And I would tell you from a general perspective on the quarantining is we have experienced it July 1st. We were part of some of the outbreaks in West were our clients. And what we saw, one particular house had a 50% penetration rate. Of all the students that were there, only a handful had any types of symptoms. Only one member actually left the house. They were very comfortable with the environment. They were able to navigate food. They were quarantining there. The local Department of Health was checking on them and making sure that they were. And it actually was not as apocalyptic as we thought it could be, right? So I think each situation we're going to learn. But we know that there are universities are working with hotels, and hotels are now starting to see that this may be an opportunity for all the empty rooms that they have, and they're doing special rates and providing some avenues that way. We know universities are trying to take rooms offline to help. In your particular house, you're just going to have to look at how you can modify it in terms of the rooms and things of the nature. To the one question specifically, as you have people moving in and staggering, and if you have people quarantining, you're really going to have to get in the weeds with your members and saying, okay, who do we have coming from which state? When are they expected to move in? And if you see a pattern and they're coming from the same states or the same areas or states, let's just states that have to quarantine, move those people to the same time. And you're just going to have to adjust, and they're going to have to be, as Adam was talking about earlier on supplies, your members are just going to have some grace. And you may need to have a call with all the residents moving in and say, okay, those of you that are coming from a state that you have to quarantine, we're going to have you come at this time period so that you guys can all quarantine in the same area of the house and not affect those that don't have to quarantine. And that may mean they have to move again. That may mean they have to move their roommates. It's just the nature of the beast, and there's not a silver bullet around it. So you're going to have those calls and work it out. But our recommendation is to do that and stagger them and have them move at the same time so that they can be in the same portion of the house as best as possible, and have a real conversation about what does that quarantining mean for them and how can we support them while they're doing it, and making sure that they're abiding by the regulations that have been out there.
Great. Thank you for that, Woody. I think these two questions sort of go to Adam. I have a question about, this is a two-parter. I'm going with the two different folks here, Adam. So there's one question about, how do you suggest handling ice if typically you have it in a bowl with a scoop? And then the other question I'd love for you to address is somebody's asking, you mentioned the 4 serving options that you are suggesting earlier. If you could hit on both of those, that would be a big help.
Sure, absolutely. So the thing that's driving a lot of the changes or regulations when it comes to food service, first of all, one of them is social distancing, which we all are aware what that is. Another one is multi-contact surfaces. And that's where you get into these ice bowls, these beverage machines, the buffet with the tongs. What the health department is concerned about is that a member comes through and touches the scoop for the ice, puts their ice in their cup, sets the scoop back into the ice, and then the next member comes behind them, grabs the same scoop, right? Scoops their ice and then puts it back in. And now by the time we get 15 or 20 people through the buffet line, we've had 15 or 20 people touching all of these items. So one of the great solutions that we can do to this is to really set ourselves up in a situation where if we still want the students to be, and if you're allowed to still have the students serve themselves, we need to make sure that we have gloves available for them and or hand sanitizer right at the buffet. Obviously that they are wearing masks when they're going through these areas. That's going to be really important. And it's a lot of stuff that we do that we don't think about, like touching the button on the beverage machine to get our water, or things like that are all going to be surfaces that need to stay sanitized all the time. Another option that can work, especially for some of our larger chapters that are out there, is if you have enough staff. We're setting up a lot of our chapters where the staff is actually serving these items for the students. So maybe it's glasses that already have ice in them before the meal period starts, where you just have to grab just the glass that you need, all the way to serving off the buffet. So that's kind of how I would say, those are the two best options to handle those multi-touch surfaces. In terms of the 4 main serving options that we have, I'll run through these real quickly, and then I also want you to know that we do have a PDF available of this if you need this, and we can, it will be on our COVID page, which I put the link in the chat, or I'd be happy to email it to you as well. I'll go in order real quickly from most desired to kind of worst case scenario. So number one would be a COVID compliant buffet. And what I mean by this is there's going to be some municipalities that are still going to allow a buffet, but only if it's done in a safe manner. And with this, we need to make sure that our staff is wearing gloves, our staff is wearing masks, so they're changing out the areas, that we are sanitizing the buffet, all of the areas around that before the students come through. Then the onus on this is really on the students and on the members to keep this safe. They need to put on a mask. They need to have gloves available and or hand sanitizer before they enter this room. And you could almost think of this like an operating room, right? Where this is a very sanitized environment that you cannot come into this area unless you're fully sanitized and compliant with these rules. Also social distancing through line, not letting all 50 of your members come into the buffet at the same time. So that would be the number one option, only because it creates a similar environment to what they're used to. And some municipalities are not going to allow that. So if you cannot do that, then the next best option is going to be a staff attended buffet. And basically what that would be is the same rules that I just mentioned would be in place in terms of restrictions for members wearing masks and hand sanitizer, gloves, things like that. But the staff would be on one side of the buffet actually creating the plates for the members as they go through the line. And so this, one thing I like about this is it does allow your staff to interact with the members. So you have these touch points, and that's what we've encouraged our staff is to say, hey, this gives you a chance to really get to know their names and talk to them and try to brighten their day in an otherwise what could be a tough day for somebody, right, during these COVID times. So that would be the second option. For those of you who have 50 members or less, I would encourage you to really look at a made to order and plated dinner type option. We've had success with this even pre-COVID in some of our houses with 50 or less members, where you have a menu of 10 to 12 items that your chef can easily put together. And members can come down, they can order a cheeseburger, they can order a salad, they can order a quesadilla, you know, some of these staple items that they really like. And that way there's that interaction only when they place the order, but you're keeping them away from a buffet situation. At nighttime, we recommend then switching to like a plated meal where here's what we're having for dinner tonight. The chef plates all these things and then the plates are handed out. The worst case scenario that we're seeing across the country, which you may fall into, is individually boxed meals. And so there are some groups that are saying, hey, we have to have everything be in an individual box. One of the reasons why I say that's a worst case scenario is because our data shows through our app, we have 10,000 users on our app, and they're able to review every single meal that they eat with us. And those who pick up late plates in pre-created containers, we always average 1 star less on our ratings than those who eat on the buffet. So if you have to go to individually boxed meals, you just need to be ready to maybe have a little bit less satisfaction from your members on the quality of those meals if they're sitting in a box. But there are a couple things that you can do to make that better. One is make sure you source a clear box, or at least one that has a clear lid, because the last thing we want to do is put a bunch of boxes out and then have students opening them up with their hands, touching all these different boxes. So having the clear lid so that you can see what's inside of them so they can quickly get it is really important. The other thing you don't want to lose is the customization. That's where the satisfaction goes down. So if you have a food service company, like with our company, Upper Crust Food Service, students can use our app and they actually can customize their box if they have to go to boxed meals, so that if they don't like green beans, we don't have to put green beans in their box and we can label that. So those are the 4 main serving options. I tried to go through those as quickly as possible, but we'd be happy to do a PDF. And the only other thing, Scott, I'll mention real quick that I forgot to mention was staff health checks and screenings. I didn't mention that during my original, but if you have a food service company, you should be in good shape. I think all the food service companies have a plan in place to screen your employees. For us, we're doing daily health checks along with temperature checks as they arrive. And then we also have an employee COVID guide on our COVID page as well that tells you what our steps will be if one of our staff becomes infected with COVID. So if you're independent, it's going to be really important for you to develop that plan and figure out how are you going to execute this every single day. And so that would be the only encouragement. You're welcome to steal our plan if you want to, if you're independent, but it's important for us to be thinking about that.
No, that's great. That was actually the next question I had coming to you. So you beat me to the punch. So I'll take that one off my list. Good question from Charlie Ruff here. And I think this one's going to go to Woody. What guidance can you give from a legal perspective, Woody? What are you have you or anyone seen a good example of a student contract that would provide an adequate legal shield for house corporations if we shut down because of a COVID outbreak, school closure, et cetera?
Yeah, so there's been a lot on this, and certainly not an attorney, but we've listened to fraternal law provide guidance on this enough that I think we can give you a good overview of it, but certainly reach out to them or any other attorney for the advice. But a couple of things on contracts. One is the biggest guidance is not trying to retrofit your contracts that you already have in place. Just going through that process logistically would be difficult. Not to mention maybe not sending the right message as we're trying to open the house for the fall and things of that nature. But certainly we should be focusing on our contract moving forward and what we can do to add flexibility in there if we do run into situations where our universities are closing or we're having to close and follow suit because of governmental mandates. There are examples of that our insurance partners have already created. Holmes Murphy, Favor, MJ Insurance that are out there in the industry. They should be on our site. I know it's on their side as well. Actual language that you could borrow, steal, whatever that you want to do with it to look at as it relates to your particular contract. I will tell you though that it's interesting is, and we've already experienced this with our clients when we were shutting down this spring and students were asked to go and close and leave, and not all students left. To Cassie's point, not all students could leave or wanted to leave due to extraordinary circumstances, and then some were just defiant, saying we have a lease, so if you want us to leave, evict us. And then when you get into the eviction process, you're probably still in that eviction process today if you started it back in April. It's a very long, drawn-out process, and it's not easy. So the legal guidance that has been out there is like, look, you have to really appeal to the humanity of your students and of your members and saying, look, this is the right thing to do. Because of we're being asked to for the safety of your brothers or sisters or whatever it may be. But the legal side of it is very messy. As it relates to the liability piece, it all goes back to the duty of care, and it is very wide ranging and broad in how you would define duty of care and what your requirements as a house corporation would be. The attorneys that have spoken on the numerous webinars at this point have all said that your exposure to being held liable is limited. You're never unexposed, if you will, to being sued. Anybody can sue anybody at any time, but proving that they contracted the virus in the facility or because of your negligence, which is a key component of that, will be very difficult. However, that doesn't preclude us from needing to make sure that we're doing what we can to adhere what is going on locally, what is going on with our municipalities, with our university, what our organizations are recommending, because anything that we do differently could and maybe be used against us in a court of law. Doesn't necessarily mean it's significant, but if you are a fraternity or sorority out there that says, look, we don't really see any way that we're going to be able to social distance. We don't see any way that anybody's going to comply with these serving standards. We don't have the money to do anything cleaning wise. We're just going to open up normally. We think this is all crazy. That's not advisable. You need to demonstrate you've done everything prudently that you could to adhere to the CDC guidelines as much as possible, and to be able to defend it as a prudent person would as to why or why not you did something if for some reason there's a liability case that came up. And then if you're doing those things, if we're being sensible, doing what we can and adhering to best as possible to what is going on around us, you should be fine. But there are tools out there, language out there for you to build your contract off moving forward for sure.
Great. Thank you for that, Woody. I appreciate it. I'm scrolling through the chat here, and I'm seeing a lot of questions are already being answered in the chat. So I appreciate you guys
Yeah.
jumping on that. So somebody have a comment they need to make
Yeah.
there?
It's me, Scott. There was two that I saw scrolling through. One, there was a follow-up question to the cleaning, like, is it realistic if they spray it and then they would leave it there for 10 minutes, they don't come back and wipe it, right? I think them spraying it and wiping it before they leave is better than nothing, right? So like, if I understand the question, like if I wash my hands and you want them to spray the handles before they leave, they're going to spray it and wipe it is better than nothing. I think the comment related to letting it sit is that our recommendation, this was based off of a webinar that MJ put on. They had an expert in from New York, and what they were saying is that they have sign up with their employees in their building every couple of hours that someone's taking that responsibility to walk around the facility and hit those high touch areas. So have that conversation with your members and your house director if you have one, and saying, look, can we set up a system where at least 2 times a day, whatever you can get out of them, that someone will go around and hit the high touch areas. So if they start in one area and spray it and then go around and spray the other areas, by the time they get back to the original to wipe it off, it's going to be 10 minutes. And then they go back and wipe it out. I think that's what we're talking about as best as possible. And knowing that when they're using a study station or a bathroom or whatever, they're going to spray it and wipe it. It's better than nothing. But if you can have some type of regimented high touch cleaning by your members or your staff a couple times a day, that would be ideal versus having to pay somebody to come in. It's just not feasible. The other one that I wanted to go back on real quick, Scott, is on isolation. I don't know that I answered exactly. If you have to isolate, if someone is tested positive in your house, there are a couple things that you need to be talking through. One is, is there a space in the house that you can isolate? Is there a bedroom and a bathroom that they can exclusively use? If not, how can you best accommodate that if they are wanting to stay in the facility? Again, going back to what we experienced last month in California, most of them didn't want to leave. Those who weren't impacted weren't overly concerned. They figured they'll get it one way or the other. So I think each chapter is going to be different. Every member's reaction is going to be different, and the parents' expectations on it. So your facility can only allow you to do so much, and retrofitting that facility since April to now is probably impossible for most of us, either financially or logistically. So think about how they can isolate, talk to their member or the residents and their comfortability and how the isolation would work. You may have to have a system to move. I know a lot of houses have a president's suite that has its own bathroom and it has a little bit of bigger of a room. I would be having a conversation with that president saying, look, if someone comes down, we're going to need to swap you. We'll have it cleaned properly and everything else, but we're going to need your room if we can't isolate them on campus, if we can't get them to go home, or if we don't have another place like a hotel that we can afford or something. We know that there are some house corporations that had the means to do so that have rented a single room apartments just to have a spot to send somebody if or when that comes up. So the isolation and quarantine piece is going to be tough. It's going to be messy. What we have seen, and I think we've had 3 or 4 facilities of ours that have already over the summer that have residents in there have experienced positive cases. And at this point, their reactions, their parents' reactions, their health, it's been minimal, which has been good. Not necessarily that means it's going to be for everyone, but that's been our experience so far.
Woody, if I can just add to that, I think this is another one where you've got to be working with your local institutions. So for example, at the University of North Dakota, we're going to pay for and take care of the isolation for our fraternity and sorority members, even though they live in off-campus houses, because we recognize that's in the best interest of our campus community. But again, if we don't have alumni engaging with us, attending the meetings we're hosting, you may not be aware of that from a headquarters standpoint or a house director standpoint, but University of North Dakota, we're going to pay for it. And we're going to figure out their food because we know we know that the facility, a chapter house, is not where they can stay during an isolation.
That's awesome. And yeah, we've heard more and more universities trying to do that. I think Ole Miss and others. So that's great that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, well, let's see. I think we've gotten to all of our questions here. If I missed it, I am terribly sorry. If you'll hang on, after we wrap, we'll make sure we get to any that we may have missed. But I do want to, we want our audience to always leave a little bit inspired and hopeful. So I just want to do a quick round the horn with our panel and just ask really quickly, yeah, these are challenging times, but as Rundle mentioned earlier, there are also opportunities here. So really quickly, share what are the one or two things that you're most optimistic about and that you're most hopeful about when it comes to this fall. I'll start with Libby.
My theme is mask up and back up, and I think this is going to be a time for the comeback of shuffleboard and for dodgeball. But in all seriousness, like, we need to be able to utilize all of our spaces. And so when we're being creative about how we're going to help our brothers and sisters socially engage, think about how you can use the outside. Think about maybe some of the expenses that we would have been spending on social things, that how we can revamp and reimagine our inside of our facilities. And most of all, I'm most excited that our students are able to come back to their experience, because their fraternity and sorority experience is so important to them, and it's been so challenging for the last 6 months that fraternity and sorority is going to be maybe the most normal thing that they have moving forward. And so that's what I'm most excited about, and how we can be able to engage with our students in a whole new way. And this is going to be a game changer for our organizations and how we move forward.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to get creative and to do things differently. So I love all that. How about you, Jeff Rundle? What are you most optimistic about? What are you most excited about when it comes to this fall?
I've really appreciated the way this has forced specifically our alumni and some really quality former staff members, former volunteers. This has taken away the excuse of travel and geography and a number of things that got in the way of in-person, face-to-face advising, mentoring. And we have seen tremendous response from folks that are now attending chapter meetings when they haven't for 30 or 40 years, are signing up to do alumni panels, are willing to engage their brothers who've always wanted to, but it just wasn't feasible in the in-person experience. And so I think, again, with the theme of opportunity, we've got to embrace that, and we've got to make sure that while the physical connections may not be the same, we're taking every opportunity to make sure that there are human connections that are occurring, even if it's in a virtual space.
Yeah, we cannot confuse physical distancing from relational distancing, and I think, to your point, this has really forced us to connect, to find more intentional ways to connect with each other. And I think that's what you're seeing with alums stepping up and being willing to engage in different ways. So love that. How about you, Adam? What are you most excited about? What are you most optimistic about coming the fall?
Well, I think that just taking us back to when this first became a reality, right? That COVID was going to have a major impact on the Greek community. We just decided as an organization to look at this with a glass half full, and how can we support the Greek community. And I think that what's important is that all of us stay positive. One thing that's really unifying about the COVID virus, and as an entrepreneur, I run into different obstacles every day, but sometimes you feel like maybe it's your business that's being affected by something, right? And oh gosh, somebody else isn't as affected by this as I am. With COVID, we are all affected, right? And we're all affected in major ways. And so what I have been preaching to my team, and I'll just leave you with today, is we can't control what's going on around us in terms of what's happening, right? None of us created COVID. None of us caused COVID. So we can't necessarily control those things that are happening, but what we can control is our reaction to it, and how we step up and adapt and change. And so I really appreciate Libby and Jeff and Cassie and Woody, and just listening to their positive attitudes and the way that they're looking to move their organizations forward. And so I really think that that's what we're going to do as a Greek community, is kind of be the leaders that we all know we can be on campus. So looking forward to that this semester.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Adam. Cassie, how about you?
So I want to be an optimist, and yet when I look at the fall semester, it is hard not to be a realist, and so I'm really struggling. So I think mine is really a combination of what Libby and Jeff both highlighted. I'm excited for students to get to return to this university experience, but in order for it to continue, they need to do through the lens that Jeff highlighted. They need to do it from physical distancing, through Zoom meetings. I don't want them to think that because we're reopening for the fall, it's all things normal. This fall semester is nothing like we've ever seen in higher education. And if they come back thinking it's the same that we opened last fall, by Labor Day, we're closing and we're pivoting back, and it's going to be a longer pivot. And so, again, I'm optimistic and I believe we can do it, but they have got to mask, they have got to stay distant, they've got to clean, and they've got to get tested. And we haven't talked about that one, but where people can get tested, our students and our members have got to go out and get tested. They've got to be surveillance tested. They've got to participate in it. And I'm not seeing that yet, even for those that are here. And so I want to be optimistic. I think we can do this, but it's going to take some behavioral modifications and changes in order for that to be the reality.
Yeah. You just reminded me a few weeks ago, Brandon Cutler at Purdue shared that we've got to remind students that 80% of normal is a hell of a lot better than 100% of our time spent back with mom and dad back at home. So we've got to help students to understand that, because it's either give up a few conveniences or it's go home. And so I think that is the reality that we're dealing with here. So thanks for that dose of that reminder and that realism, Cassie. So Woody, how about you? Anything to share?
Yeah, I mean, what's been most exciting, if you can use that word in the context of what we're facing, is just the innovation that's taking place. Innovation on how we communicate, how we work, how we provide the fraternity and sorority experience. But especially being on the housing front, it's going to be very interesting going in forward, how much of this modifications, if you will, that we've been doing in operations in our facilities will live beyond the pandemic itself. And I think it's exciting, especially for on our men's side of the equation. It's pushing us to get out of our comfort zone and requiring us to tackle some of the things as it relates to the conditions of our facilities and how we've been managing our facilities is no longer feasible moving forward. So I'm excited about what that innovation will mean. But I share to Cassie's point, and there was a question that came in from Diane that was talking about a party that took place at her house yesterday, or behind her sorority house last night, with no mask and no social distancing. And this speaks right to the heart of where our challenge is as an industry, whether it's an industry partner, whether it's a national organization, a volunteer, a house director. It is going to take all of us in working with these students and these young folks in terms of telling them that this stuff cannot take place. And her question is, will these parties be allowed? I can tell you that I have not heard of one single campus yet that has stated that any social functions are going to be allowed this fall. And if they are, they're very minimal and they're going to be very controlled, and they're not necessarily at the houses. We've also seen where you have party approvals, event approvals, either by the fire marshal, the university, or whatever, they've all been shut down. And so I think as it relates to our facility and as it relates to the control that the university can provide and the organizations they can provide for their individual chapters, that's going to be in place, and the visitor policies are going to be limited, and everything that we can do to control within our facility, I think, will be there. The key is going to be off campus at apartments and other areas and bars and things of that nature, and how we demonstrate. And to Scott's point and to the panelists' points and all the comments that have been made, it's ultimately up to the students whether they're going to want to have that 80% experience versus going back home. And the more that we can communicate on that, the more we can emphasize for that, the more our organizations can organize and be consistent on that in partnership with the volunteers and in partnership with the universities and in partnership with our staff and industry partners. That is going to be what's going to get us through this. And if they can't see it from the humanity side and from wanting to make sure that they at least have some experience, it ultimately will determine their fate. And if you're not having those conversations with them now, and if you don't have a plan to have a conversation with them immediately when they get there virtually to reinforce it, and don't have a plan to reinforce this at every meeting, at every event, at every sign, at every opportunity, if we're not doing that, our chances of success continue to go down. I'm hopeful, but that's what it's going to take.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. So just starting to wrap up here, and just a couple quick closing thoughts is you see a lot of we on this screen, and when I say the we is all of us, and it's specifically the students. And we're at a point now where we get to determine our direction. Are we going to be part of the problem, or are we going to be part of the solution? And we get to determine the headline. I can already see local newspapers and television stations sitting curbside the first week we're back on campus. So what do we want their headline to be? What do we want that lead story to be on the news? Is it Beta Theta Pi or ABC organization? You pick one. Had a 500-person rager with no social distancing and no mask, or do we want it to be something really, really boring about how one of our organizations was a really great partner with the university? I would love to have a very, very, very boring headline, and we get to determine what that is. And so the big question is, do we care enough to lead? Do we care enough to lead? Do we care enough about the folks around us to do that? And so that's the question we have to ask ourselves, but specifically that's the question we have to ask our students. Do you care enough to lead? And if so, can you lead by caring? Can you care more about the people around you than you do the minor inconvenience of wearing a mask or washing your hands and social distancing a little bit? So I think that's a question that we've got to continue to ask all of our members, and as we move forward into a really unpredictable fall. But with that being said, I do want to thank each of you for being here today. Big thanks to our panel. Incredible work, everybody. So grateful for your insights, for your leadership, and for your commitment to the community. Thank you, thank you, thank you for making some time to be with us today. I do want to quick plug for our next session coming up on the 6th of August. We've got Lindsay Picardo, and she's going to be talking about this whole new world that we're going to be leading our students into. So we're talking a lot about the human stress reaction, what our students are going to be looking like, how they're going to show up. Would love for you to be a part of that session, and you can register for that at csladvance.com. With that being said, I'll say thank you again to everybody for making some time to be with us today. So grateful for all that you have done, all that you will be doing, and just for the care and commitment you have to the entire fraternity sorority community. So thanks again for being with us. We'll see you next time on House and Home. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.